I think I do.
How do I have to talk to that dog of yours? He keeps eating your notes.
Must be fat by now. Page 7, top of the page. We are yakking about Jerusalem.
You know, a lot of people think that the new Jerusalem is going to be Jerusalem.
Yeah, I know. Not very new.
But no, it'll be new, but it'll be in.
Yeah, right. Okay, so generally the temple merchants were respected since the high priest was over them. Keep an eye on them, kind of thing. The camel caravans were protected as much as possible with guards and forts along the way. Taxes and duty were charged at the roads. Market inspectors checked for price fixing. It often occurred at the bazaars. In other words, there was collusion among the merchants as to what the prices would be. It wasn't competition the way we like to see or the way we expect to see. The various guilds or groups of merchants in various products would set the price artificially, and rather than let the market decide what the price was going to be. And of course, this is always illegal in societies long before time of Jesus, and long since after. We have the same problem in our own day today, where the people decide what the price is going to be and they set that price, and really hasn't got anything to do with the actual cost. So that's called price fixing and collusion. Right? So that was pretty prominent in those days. The other thing that was prominent in those days was kickbacks, payoffs, under the table bribes, all this kind of stuff. Illegal measures, in other words, the standards that they would use for their measurements would be off, of course, to the merchant's advantage and things like that. So this is the kind of stuff that the priests very often and the high priest people would check into and try to regulate somehow, and try to regulate at least in some regard, so that people would not be taken advantage of. But it was always a problem, and they never were able to stamp it out entirely. There was heavy trade with Greece and other places throughout the empire, with a constant flow of people and material back and forth from these places. Wood from Lebanon, glass from Sidon, fish and slaves from Tyre, costly materials from Babylon, fabrics from India, spices from Arabia, and grain from Egypt were major imports. Those all showed up in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, some things even from the British Isles have been found in archaeological digs in Jerusalem over the centuries. And also from the Crimean Black Sea area, and also from Normandy, and from even the Scandinavian countries. I think we have a very parochial view of the Roman Empire and its interactions with the Jews. It was much broader than what we think. And so there was a lot of interaction, a lot of exchange between places as far away as India and Pakistan, what today would be the Himalayas, Afghanistan, so Africa down into Ethiopia, over to Libya, Morocco, down into the Niger River area, with Palestine. So really, pretty much a good-sized chunk of the world was interacting with Jerusalem, and this would explain how Christianity could expand as quickly as it did throughout not only the empire, but even beyond the empire. So that by the time John the Apostle dies, sometime after 100 AD, we have evidence of Christianity in China, and in Indonesia, and even in Japan. So that's maybe surprising to a lot of people, but that's what happened. It went all the way up into, as I say, Great Britain, and all the way to the Sweden, Norway areas, and places like that. So there was a lot of, and all this was because of the merchandise that was desired. Things that were in Palestine were desired in other parts of the world, and things in those other parts of the world were desired in Palestine, and so there was a very healthy trade between the two. Grains from around Jerusalem supplied a small portion of the need, and so much of it came from Transjordan. Fruit and vegetables, mostly olives, figs, dates, were abundant in and around Jerusalem. Livestock was a flourishing trade, as well as raw materials from the land, mostly stone and wood. Lots and lots and lots of stone. That Israel had in abundance. Tons and tons of stone. Even today, if you visit there, I'm told, Palestine, around the Dead Sea, and especially the area directly to the west of the Dead Sea, there are a lot of quarries there. Limestone is still quarried there. Some granite is still quarried there, things like that. Jerusalem was the center of the country, and yet it was remote, located in the highlands of Israel, and it took more work to move things in and out of the city. You had to go up to Jerusalem. From just about anywhere in Palestine, you had to go up. It was pretty much the highest spot in the country. Still, it was the center of commerce for southern Palestine. The temple was the most important factor. Also, the demands of the king brought additional trade, since the city was the political center. But the pilgrimages, that is, the pilgrimages to the temple, brought in by far the most money. And here's where Jerusalem made its money, and this is why Jesus was so hated, because they were afraid that with the emphasis removed from the temple, I mean, if Jesus satisfies all the Mosaic law, all the law of the Old Testament, and you do not need to travel to the temple to fulfill these laws, you do not have to go to the temple, you don't have to sacrifice at the temple, you do not have to pray at the temple, you can do that anywhere. Jesus makes the ceremonial law, it doesn't make it illegal or doesn't make it sinful, but it makes it unnecessary, unessential, non-essential. And this, they figured, would really cut into their tourist trade, which, yeah, probably would. And so this is why they went after Jesus, is because he would cost them a lot of money. That's the bottom line. I mean, if you want to really know why Jesus was crucified, it's money. That's really why. The scribes and Pharisees and the Sadducees all were against Jesus because he would make their lives less wealthy in a worldly way. Travel, just a little bit about that. The roads were few and bad. Most people traveled on foot. Now, I'm talking here about Palestine. I'm not talking about the Roman Empire in general. Roman Empire in general had some good major highways, but these Roman roads were just that, major highways. They were not the average road between villages and things like that. So when I say the roads were few and bad, I'm talking about the roads in Palestine mostly. These groups contained many animals, but they were strictly for carrying goods and not for riding. That is the animals I'm talking about. That was seen as a wasteful extravagance. You would not find a Jew normally riding on an animal. This was seen as not only a luxury, but this was seen as foolish and wasteful and not a good use of resources. Use the animals to carry heavy burdens. You got two good legs, you walk. Okay, that was the thinking in the area. Roman officers were the only ones who rode horses, as these animals were very costly to maintain, as it is still true today. One of the things that I always get a kick out of is the fact that a lot of people move down here, maybe from Phoenix or Tucson or from California or other places in the United States. They come here to this valley here, or this area here, and they see the large, house lots, some, especially out in the Hereford area, where, you can have a 5 or 10 acre spot and a little house in the middle or whatever. And what's the first thing they do? They go out and get themselves a horse or two. And then all of a sudden, they find out that the horse is very expensive. Hay is expensive nowadays, a lot more than it used to be. Good grief, it used to be cheap. Oats and things like that, very expensive. And boy, the vet bills, that'll put you into the poorhouse real quick. I mean, just getting a farrier, horseshoe man, okay? Getting a farrier's job, it's going to cost you, $100 just to get him there. And it's going to cost you more than that, especially if he has to start from scratch. And that's a lot of times people buy horses around here and the horses haven't been taken care of real well. Maybe they don't even have shoes on. And the furrier has to file them down, has to spend hours there. They ain't cheap guys. You see some of these guys, these fancy pickups driving around here, with the double axles and, everything and every gadget in the whole world on them. Yeah, a lot of those people are furriers, and that's what they do. They shoe horses, and boy, you can make good money. You want to get a job in the Depression or something like that. Go out and learn how to shoe horses. You learn how to shoe horses. My old man used to tell me that. You learn how to shoe horses, you will never be poor. You will never go without. You will always have, because people are stupid. And people do not realize that you have to keep these horses cared for. You have to shoe them, especially around here, especially if you're going to ride them on these roads around here. If you're going to be an Indian, you probably don't need them shoed. But if you're going to ride them around here, you better put a shoe on them. And so people don't realize that. They don't realize they need shots, and they don't realize they need teeth work, they don't realize they need worming, and they don't realize all kinds of stuff. We had 2 horses when I was growing up, and it was my job to take care of them, feed them, and all that kind of stuff. And man, that's a lot of work. It is. It's a lot of work. I would not have a horse today for all the money in China. If I'm going to go ride on a horse, I go rent one. But
$250 to $500 to shoe a horse around.
Yep, I imagine. Yep.
And you're looking at $300 a week.
Yep. Sounds about right. Yep, sounds about right. Yeah. So that's why this horse rescue place out down here, south of here, is so full, and they really can't take any more, from what I've been told. They're full up because these idiots from the city, they come down here, they buy a horse. Oh, this is going to be a lot of fun riding a horse. Oh yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Well, number one, they don't get around to doing it very often, and number two, they find out they've got to pay this kind of money, and so lo and behold, one morning the horse rescue people will go out, to check the mail or whatever, and here's 2 horses tied there. Here you go. Here's 2 more.
Well, that's like they're complaining now about up there in the Tucson, Phoenix area, about abandoned horses.
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah.
That's been going on for years.
Oh yeah. Well, it especially on the road to Ajo. There's a lot of ranchettes out that way, and you see a lot of horses just running loose, because again, they don't know. So the Jews, of course, they're not going to pay money. They're not going to pay that kind of money to take care of an animal that you ride. Okay, you're just going to do that. It's another mistake, I guess, error of our history. Think about movies and TV shows and books that you've read. Maybe not so much books, but movies, TV shows. Think of wagon trains and stagecoaches and things like that. Very seldom, actually, were these things pulled by horses, especially good horses. Maybe the stagecoach might be, if it was a fairly well-off line, like the Butterfield stage, that was pulled by horses. But a lot of these conveyances, Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, all that kind of stuff. There was no horses pulling those wagons. That's stupid. You use ox, or cattle. Longhorn cattle were pretty good at it. They had pretty good strength to them. But yeah, they didn't use horses. That's just insane. Travel in the days of Jesus, very, very, very few people. Rare. Out of 10,000 people, maybe one guy or two guys would be riding on a horse. Just unheard of. The king and others in the royal family, along with the very wealthy, might ride in a coach or chariot. And again, it would be cheaper to pull those things, cheaper and easier to pull those things with other animals rather than horses, or even cheaper yet, to have them pulled by people, humans. And a lot of times the slaves were used to pull wagons and things. Because they were so cheap. It was a human man was a lot cheaper than an ox to buy and to take care of, by far. Human life was very cheap. And if you wore out 10 or 12 guys, on your chariot or whatever, well, too bad. You can always get more. Lots of them around. Man-powered litters. That's why you always see these pictures, these man-powered litters, carrying these things, on their shoulders. Again, they were cheap. Cheap to buy, cheap to feed, cheap to house. They were cheap to care for. Accommodations were rare, very rare. Lodgings were very scarce, so people brought their own tents. Usually when you want to go on a trip someplace, you took your own tent with you. You pitched your own tent every night and then folded it up the next morning and took off on it. The so-called inns were nothing more than enclosures with feeding troughs for the pack animals and perhaps a little extra hay for the people to rest on. Okay, I told you this when we were studying about Jesus and the Nativity, and we'll review a little bit of that when we get to that part in our going through his life. But inns were not what we think of as inns. There was maybe a roof over your head, but most of the time not even that. Maybe a partition separating you from the next family or from the next merchant, but not always. The fanciest ones were ones that were right along these Roman roads, and they might have walls and actually maybe a night watchman and things like that. But those were only along the major roads, the Roman roads. Okay. The biggest reason for travel was to celebrate the various festivals. Again, I'm talking about Palestine and the Jews, since we're concentrated on the people in and around Jesus. So as far as Romans are concerned, or Greeks or other people to travel, it was again to sell or buy merchandise. That was their number one. But for Jews and people in Palestine, the number one reason to travel was to celebrate various festivals outlined in the law of Moses. The most important being the Passover. If you couldn't make the others, you were supposed to go to Jerusalem 5 times. Well, 4 technically. So you were supposed to go to Jerusalem 4 times a year. Okay, and a couple of these were fairly close, and so it was a tough deal. It was, and so very few did it. It's like I've told you before. Keeping the Sabbath was not regularly done, especially before the Babylonian captivity. Keeping the Jubilee laws and the sabbatical years was not done. Everybody traveling for the Feast of Trumpets, or everybody traveling for the first of the year, Yom Kippur, or everybody traveling from Rosh Hashanah, everybody traveling for these things, was not done. If you were going to make a trip, especially if you were going to make a trip from Galilee, way up here, Galilee, you were going to go down here to Jerusalem, or if you were a Jew living in Rome or over anywhere around here, if you're going to make a trip, to a festival, you'd make it Passover. That's the one you'd go to. That was the biggie. The rest of them, you'd just say, well, God will have to understand because I can't make more than one trip a year. Many people couldn't, and even that was difficult. I don't know, we're not told. We're told that Jesus attended, during his ministry, we're told that Jesus attended various festivals. he didn't attend them all. You know, he didn't get to all of them as far as we know. At least there's no record of him getting to 4 festivals all 3 years of his ministry. Okay? There's no record that would corroborate that. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he made it to all the festivals at least once during his ministry, and he made it to the Passover every year. That much we know. And we know from that story in in Luke, that his family regularly, again, every year, unless there was something else, could prevent them, but every year they went to the Passover. So yeah, people from Nazareth, people from Galilee, people from Capernaum, people from Lebanon area, Syria area, they would try to go every year to the Passover. And that's why they would travel. Visitors from the feast came from almost every country in the empire and sometimes beyond it. They also traveled from all the major regions of Palestine. Estimates of the number of people gathered for the festivals vary widely. Some festivals were more well attended than others, of course, Passover being the best. Also, during the time of national stress or calamity, the numbers would also rise considerably. People would want to go to the temple and pray at the temple. People would want to go to the temple and make sacrifices at the temple during plagues or during famines or during periods of warfare or whatever. And so this would swell the population of Jerusalem. One study based its figures on the number of animals killed at the Passover and how many would eat on each animal. Other estimates used the number of people killed in wars during the festivals, or the number gathered at the temple courts referenced by various historians at the time. On the low side, the population of Jerusalem has been estimated at 50,000 people normally, and more than 125,000 at the festivals. That's very, very low estimate, and only a few scholars and historians use that number. The highest estimates put the everyday population at 200,000 plus. Actually, I've seen figures as high as 1 million for the everyday population. And during the Passover itself, more than 1 million. I've seen those figures be 2 to 3 million. To keep the law of being in Jerusalem at Passover, the official city limits were temporarily extended. So again, the priests would declare, probably from the temple, they would declare that, let's say, the extents of Jerusalem to be at Jerusalem for the Passover would extend out to Bethlehem, 15, 20 miles away, extend to Bethel or Bethany. Okay, any of these places anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20 miles away from Jerusalem. So that way they would decrease the crush right around the main city itself. Okay. But yeah, you're talking a lot of people. We know that during the First Jewish War, the war that destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, Josephus tells us there were about 1 million people in and around Jerusalem, and many of them driven inside the walls, and led to cannibalism by the end of that siege. So that covers the introduction of what's going on in Palestine and Jerusalem, especially at the time where Jesus begins his ministry. It was a very difficult time, a very tumultuous time, a time of great stress. People were unnerved. People were upset at the political situation. They were upset at the economic situation. It's not much different than it is right now today, and most of the time in world history. When you really stop and think about it, if you actually go back and look at each year or each maybe decade or even generation, which is usually considered to be 40 years, if you do that and you go back, I'm not saying just maybe 50 years or 80 years or 100 years, but if you go back 150 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, 500 years, you go back 1,000 years or 1,500 years, you really don't find a year without some kind of panic, without some kind of turmoil. And not just in a far off place, but in multiple places at once. Most people don't have that view of history. My dad, for example, used to growl at people who would make the comment about the fabulous 50s, right? To him, they were not the fabulous 50s as a farmer in Arizona. In the 50s, the cotton price went through the floor in the basement more than once. The price of alfalfa went to death. One year, he planted acres and acres and acres and acres of Bermuda seed because when the soldiers all came home and then they all went to GI Bill, and got their degrees, and then of course they got hired by all these companies that were booming, and then of course they were able to buy their own house. Do you realize? Do all of you realize? Some of you maybe do. Do you all realize that very few people, maybe 10% of the population of the United States, owned their own homes before the Second World War? Maybe 10%. And even of those 10%, do you know how many of those homes were homes like we're used to seeing, with grass in the front and grass in the back and a 2-car garage? A tiny percentage. Most of the people, okay, in my dad's platoon, for example, most of the people, he was the only one that lived in a house, a big house. They all lived in walk-ups. They all lived in brownstones, walk-ups, and what we would call apartments today. Okay, that's what they lived in, most of the people, or they lived in the ghettos in shacks, basically. Anyway, so when all these people got their little tract homes, and they started putting these big subdivisions everywhere in the 50s, everybody wanted to have grass. Well, as some of you who lived in Arizona a while know, the fastest grass to grow in the world is Bermuda grass. And grass that will not die. You cannot kill it. Okay? Let's pour gasoline on it and burn it. No, that even won't kill it. No, you can't kill that stuff. Right? And if you keep it mowed and you keep it watered and you keep it fertilized, it'll look pretty good. And it's pretty cheap, pretty easy to run. Well, anyway, so he planted, I don't remember, hundreds of acres of Bermuda seed, and the market went bust because everybody did the same thing. And so Texas had Bermuda seed, and California had Bermuda seed, and all through the South they had Bermuda seed. And so out here in Arizona, where we started the business of growing Bermuda seed, he was the biggest grower of Bermuda seed in the country at one time. We all lost our shirts. And so the 50s weren't real good. And he had one of his roommates, the dorm roommates, became Secretary of Agriculture under Eisenhower. And he tells me stories about calling the guy up and giving him a bad time because the farmers were all starving to death. So don't talk to him. Don't ever say to him something about fabulous 50s because he doesn't think that. And he didn't like Ike a whole lot. He didn't like Stevenson either, but he didn't like Ike much.
Came up with that idea of land bank.
Oh yeah, that. And it's also,
You don't grow something, we're gonna pay you.
yeah, then they also started subsidies. They started to fix the cotton problem, they gave some cotton subsidies. Well, that just increased the cost of doing business because then the clothes that you had to buy for your workers that had to pick the cotton went doubled. It was just crazy. And so then they had alfalfa subsidies and cotton subsidies. And he was president of the Farm Bureau in 1958. He was 58. 58, 59, I think he was president of the United States Farm Bureau. And he fought like cats and dogs in Congress to get rid of all the subsidies. No farm subsidies. He didn't believe in farm subsidies. If you can't make it on your, then you're growing the wrong crop. That's what he would tell people. Then grow something else. And of course, the other farmers, they didn't like that. And of course, the dairy farmers, they hated that. They liked the subsidies. So he had no room. He had no great love for dairy farmers. So when my first call was to a town in southern Wisconsin with nothing but dairy farmers in it. he said, "Oh man, pity you, son. You have to deal with those money grubbing government subsidy people." And so,
You ask for government help, watch out what you ask for.
well, yeah, because you'll get it, and then of course they'll take over. Yeah. So anyway, if you look back on these decades, the 60s were supposed to be so great, or the 80s were supposed to be so great, or the 30s or 20s, or whatever. That's BS. It really is. And if you look carefully at what's going on everywhere in the world and everywhere in the country, you see all kinds of turmoil. And so this is the way it was in Palestine. This is the world that Jesus comes into then is exactly alike as the world he would come into if he came first time today. Okay, as far as turmoil, as far as upset, as far as pagan gods, as far as false religion, as far as the weakness of faith among God's own people, and so on and so on and so on and so on. That's exactly he would be very at home in today's world today. So I guess that's the point I was trying to get at with all those pages, is just to kind of tell you this is what was going on, and it was not peace on earth, goodwill to men. For all the mush and emotionalism for this time of year. I don't know, is the radio station started playing Christmas music yet?
Yeah.
I know a couple of them in LA have started playing Christmas music already. Man, you know what that is? That's just all that is emotionalism. It's just the people are thinking back, and I'm sure when you were 6 or 7 or 8 years old, you thought the 50s or 60s were great, or the 40s or 30s were great. I remember I had a cousin. All my cousins are much older than me, and some of my cousins grew up in the 40s during the war. And of course, for their parents and their aunts and uncles, it was not a good time. You never knew when you were going to get a telegram from Uncle Sam saying, "I regret to inform you." But for the kids, it was a ball. My one cousin talks that she had a really great time going out and collecting rubber, or going out and collecting metal, scrap metal, or going out and, working in the Victory Garden. To her, it was the greatest time of her life. And she didn't read the paper. And, her dad, let's see, where was he? He was in North Africa. But she didn't care, frankly. She had the faith of a child. She just expected him to come home one day. So as far as she was concerned, that was the greatest decade ever. Okay? But if you were an adult living through the 40s, and having to work 2 jobs or whatever, or, had your cars up on blocks and you didn't have any rubber rations or gas rations, had to walk to the store, and you were lucky if you get a loaf of bread, and a pound of ground round, it wasn't so great. So yeah, that's the point I was trying to make here, is that God, the world has actually not changed much. The problems change, the names change, but everything else stays the same. So all right. That being said, let's move on then. Now let's pick up the ministry of Jesus, and of course, the ministry of Jesus, you might say, begins in eternity. Okay, the ministry of Jesus begins before time began, in a sense, because of course he is eternal, because he is God. He's the second person of the Trinity. Before he took on the human nature through Mary, of course, he didn't have flesh and bone. He was spiritual, as the Trinity is, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, very spiritual. A spiritual being. God is one, and yet God is 3 persons. And Jesus, or the pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of God, was part of that, is part of that Trinity. Okay, so in a sense, and the plan of salvation, we're told in Scripture, was formulated before the creation. Okay, and Jesus assigned his place, if you will, or willingly took his place, knowing he was going to be the one to take on human nature and to live 33 some odd years on earth, and then die for the sins of the world and all that. That was all known and all the people who are going to be saved was all known before the first atom came into existence, first molecule was created. Yes, sir.
I was taught a long time ago that proof of the Trinity is in Genesis.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because it says, and God said, let us make man in our
Yes,
image.
right.
So it's plural.
right. Well, even in Hebrew, okay, Elohim, okay, Him, the mem ending there, is plural. God's. Okay. So when you write Adonai Elohim, you're really writing the Lord God's. Okay. And yeah, a lot of the pronouns are plural in Genesis. And you've got, even in the very few first verses, you have God and God speaking, or really the word for speak is the same as the word for word. And so, and we're going to talk about that in just a second here. So when God didn't, literally, God worded. That's the way a Hebrew would say it. God worded, we would translate spoke or said, okay? God worded, and John tells us who the Word is. The Word is the second member of the Trinity, okay? And then down a few lines later, it says, the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. And so you've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost just in the first, 3-4 verses. So yes, absolutely, no question about it, it's there. So that's what John is going to talk about, and that's why we're starting in John, not starting in Matthew. Matthew, as you know, begins with a genealogy, and we will hit that pretty soon. But John really goes back beyond the actual birth of Christ, beyond the actual birth of John the Baptist, where Luke starts, and goes back all the way to eternity. So let's just look at that first section, and then we'll pick out some important thoughts there. In the beginning was the Word, properly capitalized, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Technically, if you wanted to translate that in a very doctrinally correct way, you would say the Word is God. But again, John is looking back. He's not trying to state a doctrinal point as much as he's describing what actually happened. And of course, there is no time with God, but there's time with us. And so therefore, John, even though he might, I would say, if it were me, I would want to say is God. He says was God to capture that idea being done in the past. Now, that doesn't mean, because John says he was God, doesn't mean that he stopped being God at some point. Okay, so you have to remember that when you're looking through here. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him. There you go. So even though we call the Father Creator, and he is the Creator because he gave the order for creation. He ordered creation. Okay? Jesus carried out the order. And so in that sense, Jesus is the one through whom all things were made, as we say in the Nicene Creed. That's why we say it that way. That's why that phrase does not refer to the Father, it refers to the Son. That's why it's in the second paragraph, not in the first paragraph. Ever wonder that? A lot of people wonder that. They wonder how come there's that phrase, through him all things were made. How come that ain't up in the first paragraph when the creator of heaven and earth? Well, it's in the second paragraph because the second paragraph of the creed, as all Christian creeds, the second paragraph of the creed talks about the second person of the Trinity. And so in the beginning, he was with God, and through him all things were made. They took that phrase, all things were made, and put that in the Nicene Creed. In him was life, and again, that's not a more doctrinally correct would be is life, but again, John's trying to capture the idea that this was done in the past. And the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. One of the things that Jesus talks a lot about, and was very important concept at the time of his ministry, and still is really today, is this idea of light and darkness. Okay? The idea of light and darkness has been a religious, spiritual theme among humanity as long as humanity has been around. And even when humanity strayed from God and became estranged from the truth, the idea of light and darkness still maintained a big hold on the people. Okay, so for example, and don't pay no attention to my drawing because it's always really bad. Okay, there you go. Okay, if you look at this, okay, and it's yin, okay, not yin. Okay, it's not yin. And then it is yang. Yin and yang, light and darkness. Okay, you see this in many Oriental or Asian religions. Most prominently, you see it in Korean religion and philosophy, and in Chinese. In Taoism, you see this in Taoism. You see it in Confucianism. You see it somewhat in Buddhism and in Hinduism too, for that matter. This idea, and of course, if I had artistic ability, I would be able to describe this in a certain way. But one side is black and one side is white. Okay, and you see this on the Korean flag, for example, South Korean flag. You see that. So this idea of yin and yang, and you notice, and they're supposed to be equal. And don't Westerners, when they look at something like this, they talk about something like this, they see, okay, the black one, that's bad, and the white one is good. No, that is not correct. A better way to look at it, a better way for Westerners to understand it, is to think in terms of polarity. That is, plus and minus, or positive and negative. Don't think of when you see this, don't think about, commandments and sins or laws and broken laws. Think about batteries. Okay, the idea of black and white, and again, this shows up in Nordic philosophy and religion and in other parts of the world. But this is the most famous symbol. It's the easiest symbol to do. It's one of the few I can draw. Anyway, the idea is that these things are equal. They're equally good and equally bad. In other words, things that are considered good, or I shouldn't put it there. Things that are considered positive, okay, or whatever, can actually be bad. A real simple example would be too much money, winning the lottery. Okay, we've all read plenty of stories about people who've won the lottery and their lives have been destroyed, completely destroyed. Not just divorces, but sometimes murder and all kinds of terrible things happening to them and their families because they became instantly wealthy. Yes, sir.
We had a sales rep in Florida. He sold orthopedic implants. And he made his last visit saying he was leaving because he won the lottery. He won $7 million. So he left his job, and then news came back to us that his wife divorced him, took half the money. He blew the rest of it, and within 4 years or 5 years, he was back selling orthopedic implants.
Well, he made out better than most then, because an awful lot of them wind up dead. So that's an example of something positive that's actually intrinsically or morally or ethically for that individual bad. And what's necessarily positive for one person is not necessarily positive for the other person. It might be negative, and vice versa. So the idea is this equal, and notice it's supposed to be anyway. They're both supposed to be the same size. It's not moving the same speed, if you will. So the idea is that this becomes a totality. Okay, that in other words, existence is made up of light and dark. Existence is made up of positive and negative. Existence is made up, yes, of good and bad, even though they would not necessarily think in those terms. As Christians, we could say the existence is made up of sin and grace. I'm not sure that's a perfect analogy, but some of our missionaries that work in Asian countries use that idea, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so the idea, folks, is that this idea of light and dark has survived the Tower of Babel. Okay, it survived the flood, survived the Tower of Babel. It has survived all attempts or all other human philosophies, and it still remains. I would gather, because of just the population of Asian countries, India and China, I would say this is the majority opinion of most human beings. And I even think in the West, even among so-called Christian nations, the idea of a balance between the two, and that kind of idea. And you take the good with the bad, right? That idea, what goes around comes around. That kind of idea. That's what we're talking about. So what John is writing here is very profound. It's very profound. The light appeared. Jesus appeared in the flesh on earth, and the darkness didn't understand. So there really wasn't an equality necessarily there. Okay, the black or the bad or whatever you want to call it. Okay, the yang was clueless. Didn't understand. Okay, and if the white is Christ, okay, then it really intends to take over. So that, as Paul writes, Christ is all in all, a totality. Okay? And that's why the dark does not understand. See, the dark does not understand because it has to give up its place, and it does not want to do that. It's like giving up sin. Okay? Most human beings do not want to give up their sin. They like their sin. Dave,
Isn't that what it is, though?
what's that?
It's light, and actually the dark is the devil. And he is constantly fighting the light to take over.
We have
He
to
didn't like the fact that Christ walked away from it.
we have to be a little, that's true. We have to be a little careful always when we're making comparisons between Christianity and this Taoist idea, or this idea of yin and yang, because we don't want to fall into the trap of dualism. It's a lot of Christians today. They're not really Christians at all. They're dualists. And I'm not talking about shooting at people or fighting with the sword. I'm talking about dualism as in two. Dual, okay, dualism. Even in Christianity today, and in a lot of Western philosophy, this idea is still prevalent, that is much like the yin and the yang. That is, there are two forces in the world. And again, one is good, one is evil. In Christianity, they would say one is the devil and one is God and the devil. Okay. The problem is with dualism and yin and yang, is that they make these powers equal. That's the problem with dualism invading Christianity, which it has to a great degree. Is what you get a devil who is just as powerful as God. And that is false doctrine. That is heresy. But we had a lot of dualism in Christianity in the early years of the church. A lot of spooking around. And it's more spooking around today. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it's taken over a lot of what is called the Christian church, a visible Christian church today. Okay, so David's right. Again, the idea is that Jesus becomes all in all. Okay, and the dark just doesn't like that. The dark, as Dave put it, the dark fights against it. Okay, so in that sense, yes, one is God and one is the devil. But we need to make the devil limited. We don't.
He's not equal.
Right.
He's subservient.
Well, he's created being. Right. He's created. God is not created. And so the devil, being a creature, was created. Okay. So that, by definition, that makes him weaker. He has to be weaker than the Creator. He has to be, because he's a creation. The devil did not create himself.
He's also beneath Christ, isn't he?
Huh?
He's also beneath Christ.
Oh, sure. Yeah, because Christ is, again, yeah, Christ is God. Yeah, Christ is. And see, this is the problem with Mormon. Right. And this is the problem with Mormonism, of course, because Mormonism makes Christ and Satan brothers of Adam, their father, the pre-incarnate Adam, if you want to call him that. And as they are brothers, Satan, according to Mormonism, came up with a plan of salvation. They never tell you what's in it, though. No. Jesus came up with a different plan of salvation, which is the Mormons. Okay. So they never say whether they know or not, which I don't know. I've heard different Mormons say, somebody knows, it's secret, whatever. But anyway, supposedly at this big council of the gods on a planet circling around the star Kolob in the constellation of XYZ, I don't know. Anyway, in this council of gods, Adam was running the show. They sometimes refer to him as Elohim because they want to sound real Old Testament-y. Anyway, Adam's supposed to be running the show, and he says, "Okay," and it's all these gods around the table from all over a bunch of other planets, and he says, "Okay, who's got a? We know these guys. We're gonna put these guys on this earth, and we know they're gonna mess up. We just know that. Okay? Matter of fact." I'm trying to make this short, but it's hard. We know they're going to mess up. We know they have to mess up, because if they don't mess up, they won't know how to have children. How anybody in the world can be a Mormon without giggling themselves to death is beyond me. Okay. Anyway, so there's two brothers around the table. Well, I guess they're all brothers because they're all spirit children of Adam. Anyway. They're all brothers. Anyway, one of them stands up. Satan stands up. Lucifer, he stands up. I got a plan of salvation. And again, they never tell you what his plan was. Okay, but anyway, I got a plan of salvation. Although I did hear one real hilarious one. His plan of salvation was by grace through faith. I read that in a Mormon book once. They were making fun of Protestants. Anyway, he said, "I got a plan of salvation," and then Jesus said, "Well, I have one too, but it's probably not real good. You probably don't want to hear it, And how humble! Oh yes, please speak, Jesus. Well, my plan of salvation is that guys work real hard. They work real hard, and they become perfect. They become gods. And the head god, said, "Oh, I like that idea. That's a really good idea. I'm going to make you teach them how to do that. I'm going to make you the Savior." And Lucifer said, wait a minute. My idea is better than his idea. And God said, no, your idea, I don't like your idea. your idea is no good. Matter of fact, why don't you just leave the room? I'm tired of looking at you. And so he goes and he takes a third of the angels with him and all that kind of stuff. So it's a great story. I mean, a great story. It makes a good movie. You can find the movie. By the way, you can find the Temple Endowment movie on the internet. If you actually want to watch it, you can actually find it on the internet. At least you could years ago. I don't know if they've still allowed it out there, but it's there. It's hilarious. It'll keep you in stitches for an afternoon, easy. Takes about 3 hours. Takes about 3 hours to go through. Temple ceremony, something like that. Endowment ceremony or temple ceremony. Yeah. It's a hoot. I mean, really, you will really get a big hoot. You will laugh. And then you'll understand that millions and millions of people believe this stupidity and nonsense, and you'll cry because it's really dumb. So anyway, that's dualism. Satan and Christ are brothers who are equal and all that kind of stuff. Okay, moving on. So what do you get from the first couple of verses? Well, okay, here's what you want to write down. We're learning how to do this here. Here's what the kind of stuff you want to write down. Okay, so you want to write down stuff like Christ existed before creation. Don't want to say Jesus because technically that's not true. It's Christ is fine. The anointed one, the Messiah. You can even put it this way. You can say Messiah. Okay. This of course makes him equal with God and therefore God. And the other thing you want to note from these first few verses of John is that he, Christ, is the actual maker of all things. Now, he's not the maker in the sense of his will. It was the Father's will to bring these things into existence. So in that sense, it was proper to speak of the Father as creator. But as far as actually bringing them into existence, that was done by Christ. So he is the maker in that sense. So those are two things for sure you want to get out of these verses. Okay. Maybe a third, if you have room there, you want to put a third in there. He is the Word, and this shows his separate personality. Okay, or sometimes we use the term personhood when we're talking about Christ.
He is the Word of God.
Yeah, he's the Word of God. Yes, he's the physical, if you will, or the eternal Word of God. Before we use up all of our space there, let's go a little further. Yeah, you have to write a little small, otherwise we'd use up a ton more paper. So I could easily have done one of these on each for a whole page, but then I'd get yelled at. Council will take one look at the printing budget and go, "Hey, what are you doing?" Okay, so there was a man sent from God whose name is John. He came as a witness to testify about the light so that all might believe through him. Right? So the idea was that we believe through the Word, and the Word comes to us through people who are sent by God, as in the case of John. He was not the light. So John is not divine, but he came to testify about the light. This is our job as believers, to testify about the light. Now we switch from John back to Jesus. There was the true light, which was coming into the world, enlightens every man. Notice that. Every man. How does Jesus enlighten the Buddhist? How does Jesus enlighten the Taoist? How does Jesus enlighten the Mormon? How does Jesus enlighten the atheist? Because it says here, he enlightens every man.
Yeah, to me, he enters into their thoughts, their minds, their whole being, and even though this philosophy may be whatever religion they're trying to practice, the same thing, is that dualism again, where, the good and the bad.
Okay, so you're close. He doesn't enter, in that sense, every person, but he is there in every person in the form of the conscience. Okay? Jesus, the Word encapsulates the will of God. Okay? The will of God is also summarized, let's say, in things like the Ten Commandments. Well, what are the Ten Commandments? Well, we call the Ten Commandments the moral law. Okay? Or, as I like to say, the holy, immutable will of God. Okay? Holy, immutable, unchangeable. Okay? Holy, immutable Word of God. That is also that equals God's will. That also equals moral law, which also equals conscience. And this is what gives a certain amount of light to every human being. Every human being intrinsically knows it is wrong to murder. Every human being intrinsically knows that property that belongs to one person is not yours. You do not have a right to take that property. Okay? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, after the fall into sin, and as time went on, it didn't take long, that conscience and that knowledge and that light was dimmed considerably. And so by now, that light is very, very dim. Yeah. It's just about gone. Philosopher would look at it and say, when that light goes out, Jesus comes back. A Christian philosopher would put it that way. When the light is gone, Jesus comes back. Has to. Okay? As long as that light is there, there's still hope to save souls. There's still hope to reach people by touching that conscience and making them see their sin. Once that light is totally gone and they cannot see their sin any longer, there's no hope. And it seems to me, anyway, as an observer of the world, that that is becoming more and more prevalent all the time. And one of the devil's greatest weapons, best weapons, greatest tools is to confuse people, confuse the light that they have, and turn it dark. That is to take good and turn it to evil, and take evil and turn it to good. And by doing that, you dim that light even more. And that's the devil's objective.
So they think that all the evil they've done is turned into made them better. They're above everything else and are perfect.
So last 2 points. We didn't get all the way to 18. You'll have to, if you have questions on that next time, we'll go through it. But last 2 points that I would put down. Christ is the universal light. And as such, he was rejected by the Jews. And you could say all humanity too, for that matter. So, like I say, if you have questions on the last 5 or 6 verses about that rejection idea, we can talk about that next time. Otherwise, please read next time the genealogies of Jesus in Matthew and Luke. Don't worry about pronouncing the names. Just kind of perusal through there. Compare, where, I guess I would tell you this. In there, look and see, look for 2 things. Read the genealogies. Notice the direction they go. Okay? Notice which one goes back into the past and which one starts in the past and comes forward. Okay? Do that. And the second thing to look for is where the names are the same in both lists. And we'll talk about that. We'll have time next time to talk about John more because this is not that big a deal or that long a discussion on genealogies. Okay?